All right, what's going on? We're going to talk about some pretty exciting stuff here shortly. My name is Ryan Thompson. I run House Hack Colorado Springs here in Colorado Springs, where I help buyers house hack. I've done several myself and have scaled to 5 properties now, generating about 50K in passive income. And we're going to talk about a pretty exciting topic today on should you house hack or should you rent? And we got Brady here with us. Brady, why don't you give a quick introduction and then we'll jump into the topic.
Sure. Thanks, Ryan. So my name is Brady Mullen. I was a financial advisor and accountant for 19 years, and I ultimately sold that practice because I wanted to work in real estate because I recognized that the biggest financial decisions that I made in my life and most people I know made in their lives all had to do with the real estate in their lives. And financial advisors and accountants typically don't give advice on how to handle the real estate choices. We all have to make them as an adult because, renting is a real estate choice. That's usually the first one people make is whether to rent or own a home. And then there's upsizing and there's refinancing and there's maybe investing and things like that, or downsizing later on in life. So we're always making real estate decisions as adults, and they have massive financial influence on our lives. And financial advisors typically don't talk about that much. So I wanted to use my skills from that industry to help people make smart decisions in real estate from a financial perspective.
Yeah, and I think you've got an awesome spreadsheet that helps capture that. So excited to leverage that to make these numbers even more real. The topic today is, I got to figure out what I want to do for the next 5 years. Should I rent or should I house hack? And we're going to talk about what's better financially.
I come across people that don't know what that means sometimes. Why don't you explain what house hacking means?
Yeah, of course. So house hacking is buying your primary residence and renting out either bedrooms or separate units to generate rental income. So you're using your primary home. You are capturing all of the benefits of owning a home that are amazing. We'll get into some of those. And you're actually paying less than you would in rent towards your mortgage. So that's the purpose. I want to pay less than what I would in rent. I'm going to capture all the benefits of owning a home. And hopefully I want to scale. So I want to have an exit plan. And I can do that every year if I wanted to, if it works out, not depending on the situation or what the exit plan is. Scaling might take a little longer. But that's the end goal, is to scale and grow my real estate portfolio by buying them as primary residences and turning them to rental properties.
I love this strategy there's a couple reasons, and we'll get into it today. It's one of the coolest hacks in the real estate and finance world because you're essentially buying what is destined to be investment real estate, but you're doing it with financing that is set up for primary residences. And that financing is better, lower rates, lower down payments, because the government tries to help people get into home ownership. It's a very important thing for a stable and healthy middle class. And you can use residence financing to buy homes that eventually will become investments. And you would not be able to get that good of financing if you were buying it traditionally or as an investment right out of the gate.
Yeah, you're right. I don't think there's any better risk-adjusted return than house hacking, and we'll get into that. To effectively evaluate whether we should house hack or rent, we're going to dive deep into these numbers, and we're going to walk through how we calculated all of them, the assumptions we made behind them, and we'll make sure that we talk about the opportunity cost, right? Because you buy a house and you got to put a down payment, there's an opportunity cost of where that money could have gone. And I think we'll decide pretty clearly like what's the best choice, and we'll have some solid numbers. If you want to skip to the end and just take our word for it, you can totally do that. But if you want to see how we calculated everything, I think or maybe you're a little bit skeptical, which I think it's really wise to be, then we'll walk through how we calculated all these numbers and came to our conclusion here at the end. So Brady, I'm going to kick it to you. Why don't you set the stage for all the assumptions we have in this spreadsheet to help us calculate whether we should buy or rent, and then I'll talk about where those came from.
Perfect. So any red cells that you see in here or red bars, when we look at the graphs, those are related to renting. So we're assuming $1,200 a month in rent. I'm not showing anything in utilities because I only show things here if they're different between home ownership and renting. So if somebody's in a situation where they're paying a very small portion of the utilities as a renter, and then they would have them as a homeowner, then we'd want to put those differences in here to capture what's going on there. I'm showing $450 a year in renter's insurance. So if there was I don't know if all renters know this, but if there's a flood or something wrong with the property and it ruins your stuff, that isn't the landlord's responsibility. You should insure that. Not everybody pays for renter's insurance, so we can also zero that out if we want to, but I'm assuming $450 per year in renter's insurance. So I'm assuming that per month you're paying about $1,238 deviate to rent that property. Now, if there was an additional cost for like a pet or something like that, then we can put some other bills or other fees in these empty spaces here. But these are the assumptions that I'm using for a renter.
And Brady, real quick, I just realized instead of me coming over at the end, I'll just explain it here as you go through them why we chose these numbers. So 1308 is the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Colorado Springs, around 660 square feet. So if you're getting a one-bedroom apartment for just you, according to apartments.com, the median rent in Colorado Springs is 1308 a month. So we're trying to be conservative with the numbers we use. In other words, we are trying to stack them in favor of renting to see how it plays out at the end.
Exactly. So now the dark blue cells here, these are the variables for the home purchase. So we're looking at a $450,000 house in Colorado Springs. We're assuming putting 5% down, although you don't have to put 5%. You can do as little as 3, or if you're a veteran, or if you don't have to be a veteran, you could be in the service, you can put as little as 0% down. We see veterans do this all the time where they'll buy homes with nothing down, collect rent out of a few of the rooms. That works really well. But I'm using, again, a 5% down as an option here just to, again, stack the deck in favor of renting in any way that's reasonable. I'm showing some closing costs. I'm showing there's no rate buy down on this. We can talk about what that is maybe later, but sometimes sellers will offer to buy your rate down. I'm assuming that that's not happening. Again, trying to be conservative, showing 6 5/8 of a loan for a loan rate. I'm showing monthly mortgage insurance of $150 a month, and I'm showing taxes of $1,500, insurance of $2,400 per year. Those are yearly numbers. I'm assuming there's no HOA on this property. I'm assuming the utilities are similar to what you'd be paying as a tenant anyway, and then I'm assuming some budget for annual maintenance on the property. So I'm assuming about $2,000 per year is being spent on maintaining the property. That could be something as simple as light bulbs, or something as big as like a water heater, or even like an insurance deductible for a roof replacement or something like that. I'm showing a budget for maintenance. This cell, I'm skipping over it here just because this is any extra. If you wanted to put extra toward the mortgage, we could put a number in there if you wanted to see when it would get paid off. But I'm not putting any extra to the mortgage in this example.
Yeah,
now,
nice.
This is showing
before you go to property income, scroll back up real quick for me to the purchase price. $450,000 is the median purchase price in Colorado Springs. There are homes listed every day on the market that you could get a 5-bedroom home for $450,000 in Colorado Springs. So completely reasonable there. 5% down payment, as Brady talked about. There are different options for that. 5 is typically the most as a primary that you'd have to put down unless your credit is just absolutely terrible. Keep going on those.
It's real common for people
numbers.
to put 3 or 3.5% down on primary residences as well, as you know. So, so here is now the next section here we'll talk about is the income from the property. So we're showing here $2,400 per month coming in from this property. This is assuming that you're renting out 4 bedrooms at $600 a month. So you're assuming a 5-bedroom property, you're living in one of them, you're renting out 4 others at $2,400 per month. So $600 per room.
And we're super reasonable. 600 is the low end of what you can get. So I've got two of my house hacks are currently bedroom rentals to groups of college students, and they're paying $625 at one property and $650 at the other. Again, half of the median rent. So 600 is very doable. I have clients that are getting 700, 800, 900 a bedroom.
So it's a good deal for them. Great income for you. I'm assuming that rent increases by 3.5% per year. That's this red variable here. I'm assuming appreciation on the home of 4.5%, and I'm assuming inflation of 3.5%. Now, inflation, that's affecting things like your insurance on your property, the maintenance, because those things are going to have their own, those are just going to be affected by inflation. So those are the assumptions that I'm using as we project into the future.
Yep. Annual rent increase, pulled from stats of how rent increases over time. Home appreciation at 4.5. I think some people might say that we're not being very conservative there with 4.5, and they would say, oh, you should use 4 or 3. I have stats from the Pikes Peak Association of Realtors. In 1993, the median price was $88,775. That was in January of 1993. In January of 2023, the median price is $450,000. So if you do some present value, future value, compounded interest rate calculations there, you can get that the average annual appreciation in Colorado Springs has been 5.38% per year. And so we are using 4.5 to be a little conservative on those historical trends.
Another thing I've noticed, people will talk about appreciation being X, but then they'll say, but when you adjust for the cost of home ownership, like maintenance and tax and insurance and stuff, it's really closer to like 3 or 3.5. And my argument argument is, well, I am already accounting for those things here. So I'm not going to do it again by lowering my appreciation. I'm already taking into account taxes and insurance and maintenance. All of those things I'm taking into consideration. But the second thing that I'll mention is the beauty of the calculator is somebody wants to look at this and say, well, what if homes only appreciate by 2% for the next 10 years? Well, let's put 2% in there and see what happens, right? Let's see what a worst case scenario would be. I don't know that 2% would be a worst case. The worst case would be maybe the apocalypse or something like that. But I don't know what you're going to do if you're planning on that happening in the next year or so. So we can just change these variables. So if somebody wants to see a different scenario, simply change the variables and see what the numbers look like.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of this calculator is that it can capture all of that and you can play with the variables, right? If you want to be a little more conservative. Those are our assumptions. That's what we're going to work with going through this example. Of course, you get your hands on this calculator from Brady or myself. You can play around with these numbers all you want. But let's talk about why house hacking is better than renting. What it's going to start with really is a conversation. We're going to go through it in this order. We're going to talk about why is owning a home better than renting, right? Some of the biggest wealth builders are appreciation, loan pay down, and with house hacking, you're actually getting rental income and reducing your living expenses. There's some tax benefits that we probably won't get into in this video that add even more value to that. Those are the values of home ownership. And then on top of that, if you can pay less to own a home than it is to rent, then that's obviously another great value of house hacking over renting and over just typical home ownership in general. So Brady, if you would, we're going to use 4.5% for our appreciation as we talked about. But if I put 5% down, what is that? $22,500. What are some of the opportunity costs, right? That means I have $22,500 tied up in this home that I could have invested elsewhere. And so when we're comparing renting versus buying, we want to say that that renter put that money and invested it somewhere else or did something else with it. That would be the real opportunity cost of buying a home that you can't invest that. So what are one of those opportunity costs?
Well, we can put any number we want in there. We could put 10%, 12%, 15% if you're going to go invest that somewhere else and make money on it. And we could see how that would compare to house hacking. But I want to be careful when we talk about that, because a lot of times people will think the money that I'm putting into a home to buy a home, what if I were to put that into the market and get something else instead? Would that be a better investment? And a lot of times people will come to a quick conclusion when hearing that and think, well, yeah, you probably would be better off buying some stocks or something like that, because if they appreciate by 10 or 12% and the real estate market only appreciates by 4.5 or 5 or 3% or whatever the number you want to use, 12% is more than 4%, clearly. But where I think people get this wrong all the time, even people in finance, and especially these financial influencers that are all over YouTube and all the social media now, is they'll say things to the effect that, buying a home isn't a good investment. And I couldn't disagree with that anymore. And the reason that I think they're getting this wrong time and time again is because they're not considering the fact that you need shelter. It may be true that if I put $25,000 down or $22,000 down on a home, the appreciation of that home isn't going to go skyrocket. Probably it might, but let's just assume that that's not going to happen. But what they're not remembering is that I've got to buy shelter one way or another, otherwise I'm sleeping on the streets. So it's not really how much did I put into a home, it's how much more did I put into a home above and beyond what I was going to pay for shelter anyways. That's my actual investment into the home. I prefer to look at it this way. All of us as adults, we're going to spend a lot of money on shelter. And there's two ways to do that. You can buy it or you can rent it from somebody else. And so it's not a matter of what kind of rate of return am I going to get on the money, although it's not nothing, but it's one small component of the whole picture that we should be looking at. The real question is, I'm going to spend millions of dollars on shelter for the rest of my life. It really is that big. It's a big number. When you multiply $1,200 a month, every month for the rest of your life, and it's increasing by 3.5% every year, it's going to be a really big figure by the time you pass away. If I'm going to spend millions of dollars on something, shelter in this case, if I could do that by spending half of that amount and own something that's worth something later on, then that's significantly more valuable to trying to rent along the way and money away into the stock market trying to earn 10 or 12% and still have rent to pay when I'm trying to retire. Another interesting thing to think about if you're thinking about long-term financial planning is that for every $1,000 a month you want in income in retirement, it's going to take you about $300,000 in your nest egg. That's using this 4% rule that a lot of financial people will use as sort of a baseline of where to start and how much money you can take out of your nest egg. So think about that. If rent today is $1,200, then 30 years from now, that's probably going to be something more like $4,000 just for a single bedroom apartment, assuming you want a home. If you just think a one bedroom apartment is all you need for the rest of your life, and maybe that's true. Some people will live that way. It's still going to cost you $4,000 a month to pay for that 30 years from now. Yeah. It's not like unethical to do that, but you're going to need 1.2 million more dollars in your nest egg in order to pay rent at that age.
Yeah, that's a lot of rent. Yeah, and owning your home is going to stay relatively flat. Principal interest is going to be the same. Taxes, insurance will slightly increase. but not as much as rent's going to. So if we invested that $22,500 into the S&P index fund, which has returned over historically 10.13% compounded annually. So anyways, we're going to come back to this number, but 22,500 compounded at 10.13% annually is going to be worth $36,000 in 5 years. So we will put that towards the positive of renting that number there. And we'll come back to that at the end and once we run the final calculations. But that is positive for renting. Strong cases for why it's not a better investment, but we do need to put that into the pros for renting. So the other opportunity cost, though, you could spend it. You could spend $20,500, buy something nice that you like. Obviously, that's not a great investment. You could put it in a U.S. Treasury bond at returning currently 4.3% and reinvest that as you continue to get those dividends from the U.S. Treasury bonds. You could rent $22,500. Anyways, those are the opportunity costs of putting the down payment down, but massive benefit of owning a home is the appreciation. And what makes that even better that I want to talk about right now is the leverage depreciation. So how when you only put 5%, you are leveraged and any sort of return that you get on appreciation is actually maximized on the down payment that you put down.
Sure. I mean, that's the simplest way to see it is if you put 5% down and the property appreciates by 5%, you doubled your equity. So the property appreciated by 5%, but you got a 100% rate of return on your money. And properties appreciating by 5%, that is not unheard of at all. That's pretty common. Let's say that we have kind of a slow market and it takes 2 or 3 years to appreciate by 5% instead of just 1. You still doubled your equity in 3 years. And that, that's not a bad thing. That's why they call loans in our business leverage. There's a good reason for that. Clearly, that's what it is.
As a house hack, putting 5% down, you are leveraged 20x on an asset that historically over any 7-year period has gone up. I think the most you can get leveraged on the stock market for, I guess, non-institutional investors like 3x, right? Because that risk is crazy. But on real estate, on your primary home, you got a place to live. It's an asset that over any time period has gone up. It's pretty amazing. It's a pretty amazing bet. And the reason that you can only put 5% down is because the government is backing these loans for primary residences. And so to capture Brady's point, on your property increases 5%, you just made a 100% return on your money. I'm going to break that down with some numbers. If you buy a $100,000 house and you put 5% down, that's 5K, right? So you've got 5K down on this house and the value of that property increases 5%. At the end of year 1, your home is worth $105,000. The bank gave you a loan for almost all of that, but you get to keep all of that appreciation for that house. So that 5K you put down just made you 5K in value in your home, which is a 100% return. So leverage 20x, 5% return times 20, 100x, 100%. Get into the weeds a little bit there, but I think it's really important to capture that, whatever your home appreciates at, if you only put 5% down, whatever that return is, you 20x, and that's huge.
Yeah. And you haven't even talked about debt pay down. You haven't talked about income from the property. That's just the appreciation when it's leveraged.
Right. So let's capture the debt pay down for the first 5 years. Your calculator does that well.
Yeah. So if we want to look at the home value, so here's the home value starting at $450. If it appreciates by 4.5% every year for the next 35 years, but if it appreciates at 4.5% within 10 years, it's going to be worth $700. In 15 years, $870. 20 years, $1 million. And this is the value of the loan. So we started with $427,000 borrowed. This is the value of the loan diminishing over 30 years and having it paid off in 30 years. So the value of your equity is the difference between these two things. So you were saying earlier how, $22,000 would become $36,000 over 5 years if it earned, almost 11%. Well, look at this.
Something like that.
Your home is worth $560. You owe $400. That's a $160,000 piece of equity. And this doesn't include any income that you're getting from your tenants, by the way. This is just the equity. That's pretty incredible right there.
It is incredible. And I think, some people will look at this and say, this is unrealistic. This is crazy. There's no way in 30 years it's going to be worth 1.6 million. Right? Compounding returns are hard it's not something we deal with daily, and it's a little hard to picture. But if you took this back 30 years and started at $93,000 in 1993, this curve would be the same. And
that's exactly
I think
right.
Talk to somebody in 1993, they would have a hard time believing that their home is going to be worth $450,000 today.
Yeah, that's just something people need to get used to having happen. Right now, it's true also that in 30 years, $1.7 million won't be be as much money. It won't be as valuable as $1.7
Sure.
million is today. So that's something that you're always contending with, even if you're investing in the stock market. You just have to know that money in the future has less value than it has today. And I don't know that appreciation is going to happen at 4.5%. It might be 3.5%. It might be 5.5%. It might be 7%. We're just choosing 4.5%. And if we change the details in the calculator, this will adjust and show that. This is pretty reasonable. And again, we can use other figures if people want to see that. And I just did a quick calculation of turning 22,500, which is your down payment, into equity of 160,000 over 5 years. That's a 40% annualized rate of return. And again, it doesn't include any tax benefits, and it doesn't include any income that you're getting from your tenants. It's just equity.
Yep. And that is a sweet return. The loan pay down, this is, as long as you make your mortgage, this is guaranteed. There's no assumptions here. This is amortization math and you paying down the principal every year. So what is that? You put a down payment, your loan started at 427,500. 5 years later, it's 400. So you paid almost $27,000 down in loan. And that's a very real benefit that's guaranteed.
Yep.
All right. So the next benefit of house hacking is reducing your living expenses. So you're paying $1,300 or $1,200 in this example. $1,300 is the median. In rent, can we reduce that? And if we can, then there's a real benefit there to house hack, paying less than you would in rent. Brady, in year zero, I'm seeing $1,238 for the monthly rent cost, right? Which we got from home insurance divided by 12 plus the $1,200 rent, 450 divided by 12 plus 1,200. And we're getting 981 for the monthly ownership cost. So that rent cost is easy. That's straightforward. We already explained that. But how are you getting 981? Can you break that down?
Yeah, 981 is basically all of your expenses as a homeowner and then offsetting that by any income that you're getting. So the expenses here, you'll see here, let's go over to this. The expenses here, your mortgage payment is $3,200, but you're getting $2,400 from tenants, from roommates. That doesn't quite make the 981 because I'm also assuming this annual maintenance of $2,025. I'm dividing that by 12 and adding that to your expenses as a homeowner. And again, this situation isn't going to perfectly match anybody watching this video. The point is, we can plug in numbers of where you're living, what you'd consider house hacking, what your down payment would be, and we can plug in numbers to this calculator to show you how it would affect your wealth. But that's where that 981 is coming from. It's all of your expenses as a homeowner minus the income that you'd be getting from roommates.
Why is it at 473 in year 5? Why is it so much cheaper? And why is that red number gone up
so
to 1470?
This graph is a little strange to look at because it's kind of inverted, because I would normally think of expenses as a negative number, but just to view it as something that we see going up over time, people are used to seeing it this way also. So this one is showing expenses as above zero. The reason this is going up is simple, because rent goes up and insurance goes up. So this is just going to keep creeping up. That's the problem with renting long term. The reason this goes down over time, and the reason, there's this bump here because mortgage insurance will eventually disappear, but also this is going down because your mortgage is a flat expense, but the income that you're charging your roommates is an increasing number. So there are also other increasing numbers like tax and insurance, and those are going up, but they're not going up fast enough to offset the downtrend that cost or charging more to your roommates. That's lowering your living expenses, and eventually looks like about year 11, you're actually living for free. In fact, you're living for less than $46 a month. Now that doesn't seem like a lot of income, $46 a month, but it's the house you live in. Most people are paying thousands of dollars a month to live in a home, to live in an apartment or something. You're not paying anything. In fact, you're netting out, in this case, $46 a month. Your expenses are almost zero. They're 48 above. But once it goes negative, this is essentially income that you're getting out of the home that you're living in. When this blue line goes below zero, that represents income. So 15 years from now, if somebody does this for that long, you'd be making $456 a month net on your primary residence, which is pretty stinking amazing.
Yeah, it is. And if you're house hacking, right, and your goal is to scale and you want to exit this home and buy another one, right, you could do that at any point potentially here after year 1, so long as your income is enough to qualify for another one. But what you can actually do is count this rental income as income and zero out this mortgage. Use your job and you qualify for the same amount of house, assuming the same income and same interest rate. So, right, you're living in one of the rentable units, but you move out in year 3 where it looks like maybe it's about 600 and you're breaking even. You're covering all your principal, interest, taxes, insurance, and budgeting for future expenses, maintenance related.
Yeah,
right?
And by the end of year 3, check out how much equity you've got. $100,000 of equity.
$100,000 of equity. Pull that out and use that to buy the next property if you wanted, right? Or you just have it in there and great return on your money. And that's how you scale. Is you move out of the rentable unit, you rent it out, you use that rent as quality qualifying income, and it pretty much zeroes out the mortgage and you qualify for the next house and you scale your real estate investing that way. So, and now you're doubling up on appreciation, a loan pay down that we just went through. So Brady, why don't you jump into the data? Show us how you get this 981 number so that it's not just something people have to take our word
Sure.
for.
So 981 is your mortgage payment plus 1/12 of your annual maintenance. If you had an HOA, that would add to your expenses. So this is basically, let's say you're not collecting anything from any roommates. Your cost of owning that home would be $3,381 per month between the mortgage, between the taxes and insurance, and the annual maintenance. All your expenses would have to, and that's pretty normal for a $450,000 house. If I'm going to move in there with a family, it's going to cost me $3,000, $3,400 a month. That's something you got to expect if you're going to own and occupy the whole home. But if you're hacking and you're getting $2,400 a month between, 4 roommates at $600, that pushes your expenses way below $3,300 because you're getting $2,400 a month to offset that.
Perfect.
So that's why this goes down at that point.
Yeah, it's super important to budget for those expenses too. We just talked through the benefits of house hacking, right? Appreciation, leverage appreciation, loan pay down, and reducing our living expenses. The biggest benefit of renting financially is that you can invest that down payment. And so I wrote a blog on this and breaking this all down. I think now would be a good time. Let me share that real quick and we'll run through our conclusion here on what's better once we take into account all the benefits of renting and all the benefits and costs of house hacking.
You've got a good summary. I know I've seen it on the blog. Do you want to share that? I think you're using the same example that we just used on the spreadsheet anyway, so it's perfect.
Yeah, I used the same numbers and wrote a blog that breaks down these numbers that we just went to. Can you see the correct screen here, my blog? So if you go to my website, there's a bunch of great blogs on here and other resources. I wrote one about should we house hack or rent for the next 5-year timeline and basically broke down the conversation we're having today and how we got our assumptions and our numbers. And so if you want to go through it a little slower, you'd like to see it written, this is a great spot to do that. At the end, I actually calculate all these numbers to try and come to a conclusion on over the next 5 years, what's a better financial situation. We'll run through that summary real quick and I think have a pretty clear answer of what's a better financial decision. If you are, let's start with renting. If you are assuming that rent's going to increase at 3.5% per year, you will be paying this 5 years from now. And as you increase rent each year and annualize it, Brady's calculator does a great job calculating that over 5 years, you'll have spent $77,220 towards rent. So that is negative for the renting calculation. But here's the positive. If you kept that down payment and you invested it in an S&P index fund with a assumed rate of 10.13% compounded annually, at the end of 5 years, it's going to be worth $36,000. So we can call that a positive on the renting calculation. And I did that math here, 36,000 minus the 77 in rent is going to get you a negative 40. So your net worth will be $40,000, almost $41,000 lower at the end of 5 years. And then we'll compare that here to house hacking. So expenses are principal, interest, taxes, insurance, repairs and maintenance, private mortgage insurance. This includes principal and interest. Principal is a benefit. We'll take that out in a minute, but those are all your expenses. You'll have paid $20,000 in property taxes and insurance, $5,400 in mortgage insurance, an estimated $10,859 in repairs and maintenance. So I add all these expenses up and we get a total of $201,000, which sounds significant, right? That's a lot. It's a lot more than $77,000 in rent. But once we calculate these positives, got appreciation, loan pay down, and then rent payments from your tenants when you're renting the bedrooms at $600 a month for the first year. And then that goes up at the average of 3.5% in this calculation annually. Your home will appreciate it to a value of $560 at the end of 5 years. That is equity of $110,000. You'll pay your loan down by $26,742, and your tenants will have paid you $154,000 in rent. So adding all those benefits up, we end up with 291 minus those costs of 201 gets us a positive 90,550 towards your net worth at the end of 5 years. Pairing the two, positive 90, negative 40, we're at a positive 131 when you decide to house hack versus rent. What are your thoughts on that, Brady?
Well, you know me, I'm a numbers geek. I love it. I'll throw out there. So I have a daughter that's house hacking. She lives in a different state and she just got rid of a roommate that was a little bit of a problem. There was a little drama there. And she kind of sighed and she says, man, this is a little more work than I thought it would be. And I said, let's calculate. Obviously, obviously I love my daughter and I want her to be happy. And I don't want her to do something that, even if it makes money for her, if it's not worth the money, I'm sensitive to that, right? She's my kid. And I said, well, let's look at how this has benefited you so far. Had you stayed renting where she was before, I mean, she's owned her house now for like 2 years, 3 years, something like that. We did similar calculations, but we back tested it. And, she's ahead like $250,000. Also, she owned the house. She owned the house during some massive appreciation. So that was good. And that's not something that I would project going forward. Maybe it'll happen again.
Right.
Maybe, I don't know. But when I broke down how much value there was to her, I said, so that little bit of drama, was that worth $250,000? And she kind of chuckled and she's like, yeah, okay.
Yeah. When he put it that way, Dad.
Yeah. So it's not like it's not just financial, right? You're showing the financial aspects. And I think some people might be looking at that and they might be thinking, well, that sounds like a lot of work. And I'm not saying that it isn't any work. That would be a lie. There is some effort. You have to put in some effort. You're going to be a landlord. You're going to be collecting rent. But when you see how compelling those numbers are, it's not a full-time job, but you do have some responsibilities. But for hundreds of thousands of dollars difference over 5 or 10 years, pretty good gig.
Yeah, that's a great perspective to put it in. Is the drama worth that? The answer is probably often yes. It's going to take more work too, which is more time, right? But you break that extra value into your net worth divided by the time invested, an amazing hourly wage is another way to think about it too.
Yeah, and I'll throw this out, and this isn't numbers related, it's just human to human. Like there's just something about learning how to negotiate with people, learning how to hold people accountable when they owe you money, when you've provided a service, learning how to negotiate and interact with them. Like my daughter is a much more capable and mature person just because she's done this. And at first it wasn't as easy. She's getting better at it, but it's not a huge hurdle, but she's good at it. And she mentioned that drama with that one particular roommate. And over the few years, this is the second roommate I've heard her complain about. But the other roommates, and she's had several over the last couple of years, are like some of her best friends now too. So it's not all negative. Those are just the pieces that stand out sometimes.
Yeah, and I think we're so risk averse, and our brains are very much wired to like notice risk. And so you think, oh, renting to 4 people I don't know, things are going to go terribly. But I think anytime that you're going down like here are the risks, you have to flip it and be like, what are the positives, right? And I had the same experience. Some of my best friends are my roommates. Some of the best friends of my life have been my roommates still to this day. So there's great positives here. So Brady, let's switch gears real quick and wrap it up. But I want to talk through the 3 objections that we get from people when we show them these numbers and talk about, house hacking versus renting. And one of the common ones right now, people have seen these crazy low interest rates and where these numbers work even better. And they're thinking, well, I'll just wait because rates surely must come down, right? Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But what's your response to people who are like, I'm just going to rent for a year and hope rates come down, and then I'll buy when rates come down?
I mean, I have a lot to say about that. I mean, if you want to get technical about it, that's a fool's errand anyways, because rates and rental increases are very highly correlated because rates are very correlated with inflation. And one of the biggest components that's being measured when we get inflation numbers is the cost of rent, the cost of shelter. So what I think people are really saying when they say, I want to wait for rates to come down or prices to come down, what they're really doing is they're not articulating it properly, but they are thinking in terms of affordability. If rates didn't change, but all of a sudden the value of homes went down 25%, that might trigger somebody to buy because it really isn't the rate that they're concerned about, it's the affordability.
The monthly payment.
Yeah. They're thinking about the payment. So this is one of those things that I think of as, it's not good news, but if you want to hear good news, whether it's true or not, then you're living in a fantasy, right? If you want to hear accurate news so that you can make actionable decisions from that, then that's not always going to be good news, but you need to hear it anyway. So it's like just part of becoming an adult. And here's the truth is, you're going to spend a lot of money on shelter throughout your life. And affordability almost never goes backwards. The one exception to that, this is hard to compute because this exception that I'm talking about is in recent memory for all of us. But when 2008 happened and everything crashed and there was foreclosures everywhere and there were empty houses everywhere and the feds lowered the Fed funds rate, which dropped the rates all over the world, really, that made housing really affordable because there was too much inventory. There was too much housing. They were trying to get people in those homes so that these developments didn't just become ghost towns. So they tried to get people into these homes. The other side of that coin, though, is that it was really hard to qualify because the lending restrictions became really, really tight because they were offsetting, them being too loose before 2008. Now I'm getting a little bit technical here, but barring that, affordability almost never goes backwards anyway. So if you're looking at a house that's going to cost you $3,000 or $3,500 a month, if you're waiting for that, let's just pick a number. Let's say it's going to cost you $3,000 a month to own your first home. If you're waiting for that to go down to $2,500, that's just not likely to happen, especially in an environment where we don't have excess inventory. In fact, we have the opposite problem. There's no inventory. There isn't nearly enough to satisfy the people that want to buy houses and move in. So there's no inventory. So that's not going to happen. It's never going to change so that it only costs $2,500 $3,000 to buy that house. So if you're thinking that if rates drop so that my payment will only be $3,000 or will only be $2,500 a month, the prices are going to rise because they're sitting on this fulcrum, economically speaking, and the fulcrum is the affordability. So the affordability dictates that house is going to cost $3,000 a month. And if you're waiting for rates to drop so that that will only cost you $2,500, the value of the home is going to go up so that you're going to have to borrow more money to buy it. And so your payment will be $3,000 a month. It might be at a lower rate, but you'll borrow more money to get the home and your payment will still be $3,000 a month. Your only chance at having that house really cost you $2,500 a month is to buy it and then for rates to go down. And I'm not predicting that. It may happen. It may not happen. I don't know. We can't really control that. I mean, we can predict things, but then Russia might do something crazy or China might do something crazy that affects the world economy.
Right.
So that's not going to say that I can tell what's going to happen in the future. Your only chance of that costing you $2,500 is to own it before the rates go down. Because when the rates go down, you can refinance. And by the way, you'll get the benefit of that appreciation that happens when the rates go down. You want that to happen after you own it, not before, because then it's just going to be harder to buy.
Yeah. And Brady, that was really well said. I like the way you explained that. The thing that I'm shocked by is how many people don't realize that you can refinance. The amount of conversations I have. I think there's a massive misunderstanding that people think when they buy, they are locked in for 30 years at that rate. And I explained what you just said to them and explained that you can refinance, and they're shocked. And I think a light bulb goes off. So I think that's something that, you and I in our industry need to do a better job communicating to people and not assuming that like they know they can refinance. So my perspective on what you just said is, yeah, you absolutely need to get into it now when there's less competition, because if rates drop, there's going to be more competition and home prices are going to jack up. That puts upward pressure on home prices when rates drop. And if you buy now and rates drop in the future, you refinance. If rates go up, then you're stoked that you bought, because you bought at a lower interest rate. And so it is a win-win in a lot of ways. If you can afford a house right now, then and I understand that that's a challenge for some people, then now is an awesome time to buy.
Yeah, and I'm not saying, when I say that affordability is not going backward, I'm not saying that it's easily affordable. There is an issue with affordability. It's difficult to buy a home. But my bad news, as sort of like a don't shoot the messenger, but the news is it's just not going to go backward. And if you're waiting for your $3,000 a month payment to go to $2,500 and that's when you're going to buy, it's not going to happen, because the price will be offset so that you'll have to pay $3,000 anyway, just on a higher loan amount, even if it's a lower rate. So if you're waiting for that $3,000 to go down to $2,500, you're going to notice eventually that it's at $3,500 instead of $3,000, and then $4,000 instead of $3,500. And you're going to think, okay, it's never going back to $2,500 now. You're eventually going to digest that. And if you don't, you're going to wake up 65, 70 years old and be like, I don't own anything. This is going to be a problem for me, because rent is going to cost $6,000 or $7,000 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment someday. That's going to happen someday, probably in our lifetimes, because that isn't a huge increase. That might be 30 years, but that matters. If I'm 65 or 70, there's two scenarios. I can either look at rent that just is increasingly, relentlessly increases, or the other option that I have is I'm 65 years old or so, and I see the end of the tunnel coming. I see, oh, my mortgage is going to get paid off in 3 years or 5 years, or I just paid it off or something like that. And all of a sudden my cost of living goes down drastically because I don't have a loan payment anymore. That's obviously never going to happen if you're renting. So here's something I don't say enough. I should say this more. As a financial advisor, which is what I did for 19 years, I never had a single client, not a single one, who was properly funded for retirement and was still renting. There are probably some celebrities that are making $500,000 a month or something like that, and they live in a penthouse that they rent. They're probably going to be fine because they have so much excess. But for the 99.9% of everybody else, home ownership is like the foundation to financial security, because it provides you something permanently that you must pay for, which is shelter. You have to have that. And if you have a permanent solution, that's better than having a temporary solution month after month that just keeps increasing.
Yeah, well said. Good job capturing the story 30 years down the line. I like that. So the second thing we hear talking about house hacking versus renting is renting out 4 bedrooms and living in one. That sounds terrible. That's not for me. Or that's a young man or woman's game. I'm not doing that. What I like to explain to people when they say that is house hacking doesn't have to be renting bedrooms. You can convert a garage. You could convert a basement. You could buy a duplex, triplex, fourplex, live in one unit, have your own unit, and rent out other units. It doesn't have to be shared bedrooms and shared spaces. So I think that's important for people to realize. And if they're interested in this house hacking game, there's a ton of ways to do it. And I've done all those ways. So
with someone who was talking about this, and she lived with some roommates, and she said that exact thing. Well, I don't know if I want roommates in my house. And I'm like, well, you're living with roommates now. What's the difference? And I'm not dismissing her concern about it, but sometimes people think when they're going to buy a home, they want to buy their dream home. They want to wait until they can buy their dream home. And my thought is, you're not living in your dream rental either right now. You're living in something that is less than what you're aspiring to as a 10 or 15 or 20 years down the road. But instead of renting something that you're just settling for until something better comes along, why don't you own something that isn't your dream either? I mean, it's a similar lifestyle. When you're a landlord, are you constantly asking your tenants for checks? No. Most of them pay it without you asking once a month. You might have to ask one at the end of the month, like, hey, are you going to pay rent? Maybe that happens once a month, but every other day, you wake up, you eat a bowl of cereal, or you have breakfast or whatever, you go to work, you have your normal daily routines. It's the same life as if you were renting from somebody else, except for every once in a while, you got to bring up, you're responsible for the house. So if you're not living your dream scenario now, what makes you think that you're going to live in your dream scenario on your first purchase? The best way to get that dream scenario that you want, which is what I want for myself, what I want for my daughter, what I want for my clients, what I want for every good person out there, is the dream home. I want you to have that. But the best way to get it is to be smart financially now and let the financial consequences of good decisions propel you into the lifestyle that you want. So if you're not renting your dream home, don't think about going to buy your dream home. Just go buy something that has better financial momentum for you, and then use that to springboard in the dream home that you want. You probably don't want to be living at 55 years old with a bunch of roommates. I get that. But the best way to be in a nice situation at 55 is to make smart decisions today so that you can get to that dream home sooner. That's the best way to get it.
Yep. Best way to get the dream home is buy a starter home or a house hack now. Well
Yeah,
said.
it's like that train analogy I'm guessing you've heard before.
I don't think I have.
No, so I love this analogy. I wish I'd made it up, but somebody shared it with me, and I was like, "That's brilliant." But the idea is like if you're chasing a train by foot, right? It's just leaving the station. You're chasing the train, and you want to get on to the second car because maybe that's the first class car. That's where your buddies are. That's where your family is. That's the nice car. It's the second one back from the engine, but you're chasing it from behind. What do you do when you reach the train at the caboose? Do you keep running on the ground till you catch up to that second car? Or do you jump on the caboose and walk forward from there or move forward from there? That's clearly the best answer. And that's what real estate is like. I want you to have that dream home. I want you to be in that first class car. If that's where you want to be, that's great. But the best way to get there, you could get there by chasing it on the ground, but you're going to spend 10 times as much energy doing that. Just get on at the caboose, buy what you can afford today, get on the train, and let the momentum of the train, which is the real estate market, let it do its thing for you while you're still moving forward.
That is good.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it?
Yeah, it's good. I like that. All right, Brady. Last thing I hear, and we'll end with this. I don't have the down payment. I don't have 5% or 3.5%, or I'm not a veteran and I can't get a 0% interest loan. I'm gonna have to save for a year or two to get $22,500. What do
Just
you
to be
say to people
clear,
like that?
veterans, I mean, I don't think you meant this, but I think it was just, you said veterans get a 0% loan. It's a 0% down payment. I think you know
Yeah,
that, but I think it just came out differently.
yeah, good clarification. Yeah, that would be amazing. That'd make the VA loan even better. It's already awesome.
That would be great. Well, so yeah, if you're a veteran, you got that 0% down payment. If it's your first home, you can do as little as 3% down for a conventional loan. So that's pretty low. And if you think about what it costs to get into a rental, like your first month's rent, your last month's rent, maybe, and maybe a security deposit or some combination of those things, between the cost of getting into a home, even at 3%, if you add the tax benefits into that, it really isn't that much more expensive than getting into a rental unit anyway. But that aside, if you just don't have the down payment, there's all sorts of ways that you can. There's they call them down payment assistance programs, and there's many of them. But the most popular one is a CHAFA loan, where people get into a home for $1,000. That's less than what it would cost to get into a rental.
Crazy. $1,000 to own a home.
Yeah, and all that, it just has to be your first purchase within, I think, 3 years is what it is. So it doesn't really have, they call it for first time home buyers, but it's if you haven't owned a home in 3 years, you can use that program. So it doesn't have to be your first necessarily, but it's a great way to get a home.
Yeah, awesome way to get a home. I've had a couple buyers recently just absolutely stoked that they can buy a home and they can, even if they have the down payment, they're saving it
Yeah,
for that down payment assistance program. That is a 0% interest loan on the down payment. Sometimes it's a grant, you never have to pay it back. And sometimes it's a loan and you pay it back if you refinance or sell. And free money. It's absolutely it's a
yeah.
game changer for a lot of folks. So,
That's how I bought my first home. It
oh,
was awesome.
nice,
Yeah.
nice. Yeah, I would have been great. I didn't know about that when I bought my first home, but that would have been sweet to save some cash. Well, I think that wraps it up, Brady. We talked a lot about should you house hack or rent, and what are all the benefits of owning a home and house hacking, and what that looks like for someone's future. So if people are interested, they can reach out to me on my website, House Hack Colorado Springs. They can. How can they get a hold of you, Brady, if they want to talk more about this, the
Well,
numbers and walk through the spreadsheet?
they can reach me by email, which is brady.mullen@almortgageinc.com. It's a long domain, but usually people contact the realtor first. So if you have questions, you can run these calculators, of course, Ryan, and you can talk to them.
Yep.
I'm more than happy to talk to people, but usually people talk to a realtor first and kind of, hey, here's what I'm looking at. Here's where I'm looking to buy. Here's what I can afford. And then we support the realtors and what they do. And I'll take a minute to say also, Ryan, that I really appreciate what you do. A lot of realtors are out there trying to serve the people with the bigger houses, trying to do, get a bunch of listings so that they can, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I really love that you focus on getting people started. And that's something I think about a lot because as a financial advisor, nobody ever called me and said, "Hey, Brady, I'm broke. Can you fix that? I need some financial advice," which is what you might think financial advisors do if you visited this planet from outer space. Oh, if somebody's a financial advisor, they help people that don't have any finances. But that's not what financial advisors do. They help people that do have money. They help them be good stewards over it. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but I wanted to help. I wanted to add to who I was helping people that needed help the most. And home ownership is one of the biggest correlating factors between people that die broke and people that don't, that actually leave something to their family. I mean, the NAR publishes this all the time. The statistics between the average net worth of somebody who owns a home and somebody who doesn't, and the number's 40 times. It's kind of sickening.
40x.
40x. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
I
the average.
appreciate that.
So
Thanks for saying
homeownership,
that, Brady.
yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks for
I've
what you do. I appreciate that.
yeah, I gotta but my background is social work, and there's always been kind of an undercurrent in the things I've chosen to do that involve helping people. And so that's certainly important to me. And house hacking's changed my life. Went from 30K a year in a social work job to 50K in passive income. So it's changed my financial situation. I want to help other people do the same. That's the goal. That's the motivation. So
Awesome.
appreciate that. Well, let's end it here. Have a great day, y'all.
Thanks, Ryan.